This is the Andy Pollin Hour on Washington's new home for sports. ESPN 630, the sports capital.
We're going till noon today with Tony off, and this would be a wonderful day for Tony to be doing a show because he does this as well as anyone in summing up a great life. He's very eloquent about this. He has great guests on, and maybe I'm sure he will, spend some time on it when he's back tomorrow. But the death of Bill Russell really is, his life is just absolutely amazing, and I'm sure Tony, if he doesn't have him on tomorrow, will at least have some conversation with Bob Ryan, who really didn't cover Russell's career, didn't become a beat writer for the Celtics for the Boston Globe until after Russell had retired, but spending his whole career in Boston, and Bob's been working there, 60 years, something like that. He knows Bill Russell. He knew Bill Russell, knew all the stories about Bill Russell, and has said, I've heard Bob say this, he says, I'm not willing to necessarily say that Michael Jordan's the greatest player of all time. What we do know for a fact is that Bill Russell is the greatest winner of all time. And I'll get into those numbers and other things coming up. A couple of stories, one breaking and one that is ongoing and will be ongoing until 6 o'clock tomorrow. And that's the local story here with Juan Soto on the trading block, though it's not necessarily going to happen. As of a couple of days ago, it seemed like a certainty. But now the beat people who cover baseball on a national basis are starting to moonwalk away from that a little bit. Jeff Passan allowing for the possibility that the trade deadline will pass with Soto still in Washington. And Bob Nightingale put this out less than an hour ago. He said, while the Padres, Cardinals, and Dodgers remain squarely in the hunt for Soto, Nationals are making it clear to teams with 33 hours left until the trade deadline, plain and simple. If no one meets their asking price, they will simply keep him for the rest of the year. Now, they may blink at the deadline, and deadlines always spur action, so it's possible that even their intention now is not to trade him if they don't get exactly what they want. They may drop that just a little bit, and something could happen as late as like 5:55 tomorrow afternoon. So we'll have to see what happens. Soto, I guess, will play tonight, and it's interesting because the Nationals are playing the Mets, and guess who's on the mound? Yep, Max Scherzer. So if this is going to be Soto's last game as a National, I guess it's fitting that he faces Max Scherzer, who's kind of symbolic of how quickly the World Championship of 2019 eroded into what is now the worst record in baseball, as the Nationals are 33 games under 500. So we'll keep an eye on that, but it's not a certainty. I was watching the game yesterday when they were playing the Cardinals. Soto didn't play well, 0 for 3, and they lost the game 5-0. Josiah Gray gave up a 3-run homer early, and that was pretty much it for the Nats. But early in the game, and I've never seen this before, Mike Rizzo was sitting what looked like the press box, and he was sitting next to John Mozeliak, who is the general manager of the Cardinals. And obviously with other people around them, they weren't talking trade, but the fact that I think Rizzo knew where the cameras are and knew that he would be on television, just kind of did this to ratchet up the pressure a little bit on the other teams that may be suitors for Soto, because the Cardinals continue to be mentioned as a team that is likely going to get him, or it's one of the three teams, as Nightingale points out, along with the Padres and Dodgers, who are the front runners to get him. And I think it was just a message to the others, we're talking. So if you want to step up to the plate and give us what we want, we're willing to listen. Meantime, I'm just kind of schmoozing it up here with Mozeliak and waiting to see what happens. And Bob Carpenter, who's probably been doing baseball on television for 40 years, he's had a long career locally and nationally with ESPN. He said, I have never seen two general managers sitting together like that. And especially with the trade deadline, 48 hours away, to see that was kind of eye-opening. And I think Rizzo, who is very media savvy, I mean, he knows how the media works. He does a lot of media. I think he knew what would happen on Twitter once that shot got out, and there it was. So there's that. Also, the breaking news on Deshaun Watson, in case you're just jumping in your car, haven't heard this, the verdict, according to to Adam Schefter of ESPN, the disciplinary officer in the case. Sue L. Robinson, a former judge, issued a 6-game suspension, she did a 15-page conclusion that stated that though Watson violated the personal conduct policy, there was not enough evidence to justify an indefinite suspension. Now, the league was negotiating on this for a while. They were trying to get a 1-year suspension on this. The Players Association must have known what was coming because they put out a statement yesterday and said that we're not going to appeal any ruling on this, and we don't think Commissioner Roger Goodell should appeal this either. Now, Goodell has 3 days to appeal this. The problem for the league is if they appeal, it would be possible for Watson to play in the opening game. So it's a really ticklish situation because he could then file a suit, for on this and delay this in court, and this could go on for a while, and he could be playing while this is being adjudicated. So it's a difficult situation for both sides. I would think that Goodell is not going to appeal this, that Watson will sit out the first 6 games of the year. There were no criminal charges filed in this. I mean, you could certainly make the case he should have been suspended longer than 6 games. But this is how a former justice looked at this, and she did it in her home state of Delaware. She had a 3-day hearing last month, or back in June, and heard arguments from the league, the union, and Watson's attorney. And this is what she came up with: 6 games. And there is, precedence for players who have been involved in domestic incidents where they have gotten a 6-game suspension. Now, you could argue the number of cases here is insane. You're talking about 30 cases that were settled by the Houston Oilers. But that's where we are now, and the way the contract is structured for Watson, he'll lose $333,000. He will lose about, let's see, if you do the math here, it's 17 games. And if Aaron Rodgers is making $50 million a year, I'm guessing that's what Aaron Rodgers makes in a quarter. So that's all he's going to lose based on the way his contract is structured, because it's only $1 million this year. He's only going to lose $333,000. I don't mean to laugh at this, but it's just it does seem laughable that that's a suspension. And the thing to watch for now, what's going to happen with Dan Snyder? Mary Jo White investigating this seemingly forever. Now that this is out, does the league quietly slip this in like Friday afternoon? And business goes on as usual, because the league is about to step into a period of time where we actually start talking about games. The Hall of Fame game is coming up, I believe, this weekend. The Commanders will play their first exhibition game a week from Saturday, so there's lots of distraction on this. And this could be exactly what the league is looking for. Nothing to see here. Let's go play some football. Let's go make some more money. And by the way, and I'll talk more about this later, the valuations of the NFL teams are out. The Dallas Cowboys, number 1 at $7.6 billion. Pretty big gap between 1 and 2, because the Rams are valued at $5.9 billion coming off a Super Bowl. The Commanders, for all the mishigas, for all the problems they have, including lack of season ticket sales, lack of local revenue, all that goes along with a team that's run by Dan Snyder, they're number 8. $4.7 billion. They're worth more than $1 billion more than the Baltimore Ravens, who are seen as a well-run franchise. So just goes to show you, no matter what you got here with the Deshaun Watson case, with all the Snyder stuff, doesn't matter. It's a money-making machine, and the league bulldozer rolls on, and teams continue to make billions and billions of dollars. It's just remarkable where the NFL is now. All right, to Bill Russell, who passed away yesterday at the age of 88. And I'll give you a quick synopsis here from Dan Shaughnessy, longtime columnist with the Boston Globe. This is about 30 seconds. If you asked someone who had never heard of Bill Russell, who was Bill Russell, this is Dan Shaughnessy on Russell.
Up there, his rookie year, Kuzi was MVP of the league that year. And
excuse me, let me get that right. This is Dan Shaughnessy on Bill Russell.
When he comes in, they had been good, but they never got across the finish line until he got there. His rookie year, Cousy was MVP of the league that year and established as the Mr. Basketball. But then Russell comes in as a rookie, and they win the championship. And they won it, 10 more times in 12 more seasons. And, of course, he becomes the first black head coach in American sports. And he was always a warrior for social justice. He didn't cower to anyone, and he played life by his rules. And just had great dignity and honor and the greatest winner.
A lot to unpack there, but the last thing he said, the greatest winner. You can debate Jordan and LeBron and whoever else you want to throw into the argument as the greatest basketball player ever. What you cannot debate is that Bill Russell is the greatest winner in the history of American sports. And if there's another sport in another country where someone has been this dominant, I don't know about it. He won 2 NCAA championships back-to-back years at the University of San Francisco, one of them with an undefeated team. He won an Olympic gold medal. He played 13 years in the NBA, and he won 11 championships. He didn't win it his second year because he had an ankle injury, and if he played, he didn't play much. And he didn't win it in his first year as player-coach, losing to the Philadelphia 76ers, who had arguably one of the greatest teams of all time. Every other year, he won. He won 8 straight NBA championships. 8 straight. Now, you could say, okay, there weren't as many teams. But you could flip that argument the other way, too. And you could say, well, if you only have 8 teams, and in those days, I think the rosters were only 10, so that's 80 NBA jobs. You were only getting the cream of the crop in those teams. Nowadays, where you have 30 teams, the talent's more spread out. Is the talent better across the landscape of basketball now? Yes, of course. In those days, you made very little money playing basketball, and there were those who had a chance to play in the NBA out of college and decided they wanted to get regular jobs and make more money. Or the real money, relatively speaking, was in baseball. You could make more money doing that, and a lot of guys did that or play football. But the reality is, in his time, he is the most dominant winner there ever was. And when it was on the line, he was at his best. In closeout games, he was 21-0. That's 9 NCAA tournament games, the Olympic gold medal game. He played in 10 Game 7s throughout his career and one deciding Game 5, won them all, 21-0. I'll talk more about the rivalry with Wilt Chamberlain, but here's a number that you should keep in mind when you think about Chamberlain versus Russell. It's a very simple number, 143. 143 is the number of times that they faced each other. 94 regular season games, 49 playoff games. You could talk about the greatest rivalries. Martina and Chris in tennis, maybe they played each other in majors 6 or 7 times. Willie Mays and Mickey Mantle, they used to debate. They faced each other in the World Series, I think once, maybe twice. Even Ali Frazier, 3 times. 143 meetings between these two titans. Just absolutely unbelievable. There are a few peers that Russell had, and Wilt Chamberlain was one of them. Another one of them was Oscar Robertson. Now, Oscar and Russell really didn't play that much in meaningful championship-like games because for Oscar Robertson, he was on a team with the Cincinnati Royals that really wasn't at the level of the Boston Celtics. When it came to going head-to-head with Russell, it was usually a Chamberlain team. Now, Chamberlain played for a variety of teams. He was drafted by the Philadelphia Warriors. The Philadelphia Warriors went out to San Francisco. He was with them for a brief period of time, was traded to the Philadelphia 76ers, and that's where he and Russell, I think, hooked up the most often. And then in the late 60s, Wilt said he was going to retire or go play in the ABA if they didn't trade him to the Lakers, which they did, and they faced off in the championship a couple of times. But Oscar Robertson is a player who is certainly in the conversation with those two, with Wilt and Russell. And Oscar was on last night on ESPN Radio talking about how great Bill Russell was as a player.
I met him in 1956 when I was a senior in high school, and he came through Indianapolis with an all-star team. to play basketball. And from that point on, he's been such a good friend of mine. It's almost unbelievable. But it was and I must say, the trade that when he went from St. Louis to Boston was one of the greatest trades in the history of basketball, because look what it did for the Celtics, and look what it did for Bill Russell and the rest of the Boston Celtics. Bill was a tremendous individual. It was an honor to play against Bill because of his great defensive abilities and how he led his team. And it just makes you a better basketball player in yourself.
For a lot of our listeners here, Oscar, they may not have had the opportunity to see Bill Russell play. Can you put into words what made him so tenacious as a player, as an athlete, on the glass and on the defensive side of the game?
Well, first of all, Bill was an outstanding track star in a high jump. I must tell you, which a lot of people don't know this, and he was a smart basketball player. And if you ever notice, Bill, when he'd block a shot, he would knock the ball into the stands. He'd hit it, it would go straight up in there, and he would retain it. And also, I think what's really helped Bill become a much, much better defensive player was playing against Wilt Chamberlain for so many times. And Wilt played for Philadelphia, and Boston played for Boston. And they had all these great rivalries going. It was almost unbelievable to see those two guys go at each other. But I never forget, I was on a trip with Bill and Red Auerbach to a certain extent. We had gone to the Yugoslavia, Egypt, Romania, and Egypt to play basketball. And we were there sitting down at dinner, and I'm sitting talking to Red, and Red would always tease me about coming back to play with the Celtics. And I said, oh, Red, I don't want to play the Celtics. And he kept going on and on. I said, well, Red, you guys wouldn't have done anything if you had made the trade to get Bill Russell. Oh, man, Russell would just laugh like crazy. And we were teasing each other about it. It was so funny. It was really so. I mean, I don't know if you've been around Bill when he started to laugh like that. It was really heartwarming to hear that. I wish I could hear it again, but I just won't be able to do it.
Yeah, the famous cackle. And when he did television for a number of years in the 70s, he was famous for that cackle. He's also famous for shot blocking. But recognize this. This is more from Oscar on what a kind of a shot blocker Russell was.
I was doing a basketball game with Hubie Brown at one time. I don't know what game it was, and they came up with a stat and said, oh, gosh, the greatest shot blocker in the history of basketball was Mutombo. I said, and I'm on the air. I said, oh, Hubie, wait a minute. I think you missed that. He said, what do you mean, Oscar? I said, you said the greatest shot blocker in the history of the game of basketball was Mutombo. I said, I know you blocked a lot of shots, but you missing two guys. One is Bill Russell. He said, oh, they didn't keep the stats back then. I said, oh, I really didn't know that. The stats that he put amassed while playing basketball and blocking shots, they didn't keep them.
Yeah, it's one of the great mysteries because they did not keep track of block shots until 1973. Russell retired after the 68-69 season. Really remarkable thing. And he is not only known as a guy who could block shots, but he was a guy who would block shots and start the fast break with them or block a shot in the direction of a teammate. I mean, he studied angles. And I remember reading this after he retired, after he won 11 championships in 13 years. He basically beat all comers. He lost once to Wilt, okay, and he was injured in the series against the Hawks. But every time he needed to win a championship, just about, he won a championship. Well, after he retired, the year after he retired, coming into the NBA was the next great big man, Lou Alcindor, out of UCLA, the next transformational player. And I remember seeing a story in Sport Magazine about Bill Russell. And there was some speculation from idiots, I think, who said, oh, well, look at Russell. He's ducking Kareem. He was actually known as Alcindor then, didn't change his name till like his second year. You imagine that he would be ducking somebody? And Russell at the time was seen as arrogant. And he was a guy who was not the warmest person. He didn't like to sign autographs and would turn that down. He said he'd shake your hand, but that was about it. And he could seem cold and aloof. And he said in this story, and this was seen as someone who was aloof and someone that was unapproachable, he said in the story, talking to me about basketball is like talking to Einstein about math. But when you think about it, it really was. It was really something else. Coming up, I want to get to what Ryan Kerrigan said over the weekend as he announced his retirement. But there are more Bill Russell stories to tell, including how Bill Russell became a player coach in his third to last year. He spent his last 3 years as a player coach with the Celtics and won 2 championships during that time, by the way. Just an unbelievable life and an unbelievable basketball career for Bill Russell. We'll spend a lot more time on it as we roll through the morning. It's the Andy Pollin Hour, ESPN 630.
The Andy Pollin Hour on ESPN 630, the sports capital.
Go until noon today, and we'll hear from Ryan Kerrigan, who spoke over the weekend. He signed a one-day contract with the Commanders to retire with the team, spent 10 years with them, the all-time sack leader here, and finished up with Philadelphia last year. Said he wanted to continue to play, but got a diagnosis on his knee actually before last season, and that's when he decided last season would be his last. He played pretty well in the Eagles playoff game last year and thought about coming back, but after working out for a couple of months, decided to hang it up and had some really interesting and emotional things to say. But the death of Bill Russell is very significant. I don't think you could write the history of basketball without mentioning Bill Russell in the first paragraph for not just what he did in the NBA with 11 championships in 13 years with the Celtics, but the back-to-back NCAA titles with the University of San Francisco, the best player on what was very likely one of the greatest teams ever to play college basketball. They also had Casey Jones, who later teamed up with Russell to win a bunch of championships in Boston, and the Olympic gold medal, and his place in history as the first African-American coach of any major sport. You know, long before there was, and here's something really incredible, he went to McClymonds High in San Francisco. He wasn't the best basketball player on his high school team. In fact, he was cut from the junior varsity. Gangly guy, took a while. This is often the case with guys of that size. He was 6'10", and it took a long time for his coordination to catch up with his body. The best player on the McClymonds basketball team was Frank Robinson. Frank Robinson became the first African-American manager in baseball history when he took over the Cleveland Indians in 1975, and Bill Russell in 1966, almost a decade earlier, became the first black coach when he was a player coach with the Boston Celtics. And after he concluded his career, he did an interview talking about his hiring. Now, he was playing for Red Auerbach from the start of his career. Auerbach pulled off this miraculous trading, and this addresses what the NBA was like in those days, where he traded 2 white stars for the rights to Bill Russell. They also had to throw in the rights to the Ice Capades for a week because the owner of the Celtics also owned the Ice Capades. So it was a money transaction, and also in a racist town like St. Louis, that they were welcoming 2 white players rather than this transformational black player in Bill Russell. But in 1966, after winning his 8th straight championship, Red Auerbach decided that he was going to quit coaching and just run the team as the general manager. And Russell said, well, Red, I don't really want to play for anybody else. How about if I coach the team? And there was this great partnership between the two of them. I remember talking to John Thompson about this, about how Red Auerbach knew how to handle men, how to manage men. And Bill Russell really never talked about playing for Red. He talked about playing with Red. And Red respected Bill Russell so much, he said to himself, there's probably nobody else but me who can coach you. So, yes, why don't you coach yourself and coach the team? And Russell did that. He didn't win the championship the first year, losing to a great Wilt Chamberlain 76ers team, but he won the next 2, including the last one in 1969 against Wilt's Lakers team. And as the legend has it, Jack Kent Cooke, of course, owned the Lakers in those days. He owned the Forum where they played, and he was so sure that the Lakers were going to win Game 7, he ordered all these balloons to be put up in the rafters at the Forum, expecting that he would release the balloons once the Lakers won. Well, it didn't happen. Russell scored only, I think, 6 points in that championship game, but he had 21 rebounds, and he did what he did best. He won the game. So he accomplished everything as a player, and he accomplished it as a coach, too. He's in the Hall of Fame as a coach as well. How many coaches win 2 championships? There aren't that many, outside of Red and Phil Jackson and maybe a handful of others. That winning 2 championships is amazing. Having Bill Russell as your best player when you win those championships, yeah, it doesn't hurt. But he also coached these teams to 2 titles, which is what he was all about, winning. And after he retired, he gave an interview about being hired as a coach and what it was like to face the media in his first news conference.
I think it was the first time I ever remember that a coach or a manager has been appointed and there was questions about his qualifications. You know, is he qualified? That's the first time. Now, there have been many managers in baseball. They change them about, or even in the National Basketball Association, the average coach lasts about 2.5 years. And so a lot of them must have some problems. But it's the first time I've heard as much discussion about qualifications, which irritated me to no end, because I knew it was strictly a racial thing, because they hire coaches every day that no one says publicly anyway, is he qualified? Or that much discussion about what kind of coach you make.
If you feel that it was on more or less racial tones, did you also feel that perhaps they felt that being a black coach that you would be more sensitive to the black players?
I don't know. They asked me questions like, could I coach without being prejudiced toward the white players? In all the years I've been playing, no one ever asked any coaches that I played for if they could coach without being prejudiced to black players. In fact, it never even come up. And this is, we'll find out in the colleges all over the country that this is the case in a lot of cases, that coaches are prejudiced against the black players. But when I took the job, this is the first time I think it was raised where the coach could coach objectively. But really, since I'm such an egotist, that's what I call it, it didn't bother me because I didn't care what they thought, really. And those questions, I just said, well, okay, you ask your questions, I'm not going to worry about it. You ask your questions, you get a silly question, silly answer, and we get that over with, and I go about doing what I want to do. So it didn't bother me. All those questions, it irritated me a little bit, but I forgot about it after the press conference was over.
Say it can't happen? That a reporter wouldn't be stupid enough to ask a question like, do you think you will show favoritism to the black players? Yeah, it happened. This is from the video. I wish I could show you this because the look in Russell's eye when he gets a question like that is, I mean, it could freeze dry the reporter instantly. This is from the news conference announcing Bill Russell as head coach and player of the Celtics in 1966.
Here he is, the new coach of the Celtics, the best team.
As the first Negro coach of a major league sport, can you do the job impartially without any racial prejudice in reverse?
Yes.
How?
Because the most important factor is respect. In basketball, respect demands for his ability, period.
I mean, just think about that. Just think about, and that was, I guess, considered an acceptable question at the time. But that is what he was up against as the first African American coach, and all he did was win. He didn't beat Wilt in the first year, but he beat him in his last time around and left after the 1968-69 season. The story of Bill Russell is absolutely remarkable. He grew up, part of his growing up was in Louisiana, and his family moved when he was 9 years old and moved to San Francisco. And the kind of prejudice that he faced while he was and his family faced while they were in Louisiana is absolutely incredible. Jack McCallum wrote about this at SI. McCallum, longtime writer for the magazine, wrote about this today, and he said Russell was 9 when his parents arrived in Oakland, so he had only a minor sense of the Jim Crow indignities that his parents had suffered in Louisiana. Charles Russell, his dad, had a shotgun stuck in his face at a gas station, and Katie, his mom, was told by a policeman to go home and change because she was wearing, quote, white women's clothing. So it's with that he goes to San Francisco. He's a gangly kid, gets cut from the junior high basketball team. They try to push him towards track because he's just, he's fast and he's got these long limbs, and maybe that can work for him. He became a high jumper and actually competed against Johnny Mathis, the singer at Washington High in San Francisco, but eventually made it to the basketball team. As I've read about this too, he didn't play many high school games because in those days you could graduate after the first semester. So he took an English class, I guess, and that made him eligible to graduate at the end of the first semester. So he really only played a handful of high school basketball games. He had one scholarship offer, and that was to the University of San Francisco, where he happened to team up with Casey Jones. And in their junior year, they won the opening game, lost to UCLA, then won 25 straight on their way to the championship. And then they ran the table the next year, going 27-0, crushing Iowa in the championship game. So he was a winner coming out of college, and became a winner, of course, instantly with the Boston Celtics, and partly because the Atlanta Hawks, well, the then St. Louis Hawks, made this famous trade in which they got two white players for this person who became unbelievable. This is more on the story of Bill Russell, and it's an interview that he did with Charlie Rose a number of years ago. I don't know how many years ago this was, but Russell was a guy who was very proud, and he didn't celebrate awards. And you wondered why. What's the case? You know, a lot of people just looked at him as sort of like an odd guy. Why does he do this? This is really the best explanation of this. When Russell retired after the '69 season, they wanted to retire his uniform. He said, no, I don't want to do that. He went in the Hall of Fame in 1975 and did not even show up. Why would he do that? This is Russell with an explanation, Charlie Rose, about why he went in that direction.
I didn't want Red to retire my number, and he insisted. Because I had long before that decided that I rejected awards.
Including the Hall of Fame?
Yes. And so he says, I can't, do that. So we had a private ceremony, just the team and I.
What was behind this aversion to awards?
Well, first of all, it may sound funny from living in the projects, but I lived a very sheltered life as a youngster. My family just kept me in a cocoon. I mean, they protected me from everything. And so I thought that I thought that everything was fair. Okay, I didn't know any better. And when I went out into the world and I started playing basketball quite well, awards were there. How did they do that? And so I made a decision early in my career that what I'll do is I'll try to win every game and win every championship. And if you win those, that's become a historical fact and not somebody's opinion.
It's a fact.
Yeah, because like in my junior year, I was saying to a friend of mine, the only time an award ever offended me, and that was the last time it offended me, my junior year in college, we were 29 games, we won 28. We're number one defensive team in the nation. We were ranked number one. We won the Final Four. I was the MVP in the Final Four. I averaged 20 points and 21 rebounds, I believe. And I was the only guy in college really blocking shots. And we averaged 22-point difference margin of victory. And I came home, and the awards dinner for Northern California, I was runner-up to another center as outstanding player.
And you said?
How does this work?
How could it be?
So I said, I will not abdicate the judgment on my career to people like that would do things like this. So, because I could go through life really annoyed if I let them determine what my career was like.
Isn't that something? I mean, he didn't say it, but it's implied that the center was white. The other player that got the award was white, and that's the way the world was back in that day. You also heard the great Russell cackle at the end of that. On the handshake thing, I got this before the show from my friend Marty Aronoff. Marty Aronoff's the greatest sports statistician who ever lived. He was Dick Stockton's personal statistician when we had the glory days of the NBA in the 1980s when Magic and Bird would play, and Russell was doing color for some of those years with them. And he said sometimes Dick Stockton would leave the table while they're getting ready to do a game, either go to the bathroom or get stats or something like that. And here would be Marty sitting at the table with Bill Russell, and people would come up and ask for his autograph. And Marty had to be the cop there. It was his responsibility, as he said, to keep them from interrupting him at those times with my telling them that Mr. Russell does not sign autographs. My traffic cop role helped enhance my relationship with him. And look, Bill Russell was not a warm and friendly person, certainly to people he didn't know, but he was someone who was a loyal person, and his loyalty was to people that he had played with in the past and had stood by him, and one of those was John Thompson. And I remember when John Thompson first started doing his radio show with us at the old station, which would have been 1999 into 2000, right after he, as he said, resigned, not retired, as Georgetown coach. And a couple of times he brought Bill Russell into the station. And you talk about a sight that was heart-stopping, seeing Bill Russell and John Thompson, both of them about 6'10", walking side by side down the hall, these incredible trailblazers, the first African-American coach in professional sports history in the United States, next to the first African-American coach to take a team to a Final Four and win an NCAA championship. Wow, that was a true wow. I'll talk more about Russell. I got some more comments. Michael Wilbon weighed in last night on ESPN. Jackie McMullen with some great stories. We'll get to that at 11 o'clock. I also want to talk more about the rivalry with Will Chamberlain. Let me segue to Ryan Kerrigan, who had his retirement this past Friday into Saturday. He signed a one-day contract as a commander and then held a news conference on Saturday to talk about his career. He is the all-time sack leader in organization history. I think he had 95 and a half sacks, passing Dexter Manley. And he told the media as to why he wanted to sign this one-day deal with Washington.
Yeah, it was something that I felt strongly about, and I wanted. This is where my heart is. This is where I started. This is where I unfortunately wasn't able to finish, but yesterday was great, and it really, and like I said, they went above and beyond to make it a special day for me, and we'll remember that day for the rest of our lives. Yeah,
he walked in, and Ron Rivera had it arranged that the team gave him a standing ovation, which was really nice. This is about coming back to, and you'll hear what he calls the facility, coming back to Ashburn after being away for a year, playing in Philadelphia, and what it was like to walk into the building again.
A lot of fun game memories, like when we beat Dallas in 12 to win the division here. In 18 when we beat Dallas at home and I got the forced fumble and Preston Smith picked it up for a touchdown. Getting a pick six my first game, that was awesome. But when I come back here to Redskins Park that I really am like that's why I've loved this place, because it's all the relationships you build over the years with teammates, coaches, the people in the kitchen, the strength staff, you guys. I mean, I've developed a lot of great relationships with you guys, and I've got to know you guys a little bit outside of your jobs here, and so it's those that have made it that really have made this such a special thing, and a big reason why it's hard, while even that it's hard to walk away, even though I know it's the right thing.
Yes, he did call it Redskins Park. He did spend 1 year as a member of the Washington football team. In fact, his last game was a playoff game, which he lost. He never played in a winning playoff game. But that was the game against Tampa Bay where he lost to Tom Brady. And there were no fans there, unfortunately, but he spent a long time on the field after the game, just soaking it in, knowing he was not coming back to the franchise. But he goes down as the last great player as a Redskin. It transitions now, and the players now going forward, if hopefully Chase Young develops into a great player, but he'll do it as a commander. So Ryan Kerrigan is, in many ways, the last Redskin. And that's the way, I guess, he will be remembered. Now, as far as what he was as a player, it's interesting that he's really just thought of more in an Iron Man way, 139 straight games. He was always available. But in his first game, as he talked about there, he tipped an Eli Manning pass up in the air, picked it off, and took it in for a pick six. And at that point, you thought, okay, they got themselves a game breaker here. And he really wasn't. He was just steady. Year after year after year, piling up 10 sacks or more. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's just that the perception that he created in his first game really didn't reach that. But still, a stand-up guy and a guy who's remembered for the dedication that he had to the team. This is on the decision, being mentally ready to make this move after 11 years in the NFL.
I mean, I had a long time because, like I'd said, it had, the reports I got were in, I guess that would be May of 21, so more than a year ago. So I knew that last season was going to be my last season. I kind of told myself okay, you're not playing beyond this. You probably shouldn't be playing now, but let's we're gonna give it one more shot, just because you're not ready, you're not emotionally ready. And so I knew I wasn't going to be playing this season. To not be playing this season was the plan all along, and I'm glad I came to the decision when I did, because I know that it's the right thing.
Yeah, it's the mentality of a football player. A doctor says, yeah, your knee is shot, you need to walk away. Oh, no, I'm going to squeeze one more year out. And then he was still thinking about playing. He said it wasn't until June that he finally gave up on the idea of coming back to play, and he's totally at peace with that, and leaves as a commander. He's got 3 daughters, and he's got things he wants to do. He says he wants to coach, and I bet he'll be a very, very good coach. This is the final thing that I pulled from the about 21-minute news conference on Saturday. This is what he wants his legacy to be for the fans of Washington.
I just want them to think back to, for me personally, I just want them to know that I gave them everything I had, literally everything I had, emotionally, physically, they got all of me, football wise, football was my life. I didn't have a lot of hobbies. I played a little bit of golf in the off season. I got a wife and 3 daughters, but other than that, it was all about football. It was how's this daily decision going to help me with football? Okay, I'm waking up in the morning, I'm eating breakfast. Okay, how's this breakfast going to help me with football? And that's how I approached every day of my football career. And so I want fans to know that it meant that much to me, that my performance and what I was showing on Sundays was that important to me, that it was my driving force in life.
Now think about that. He didn't play in many winning games. He was on some terrible teams, but he gave it everything he had, and you got to respect him for that. And he even talked more about, he'd be having a dinner in February, and did it have enough protein in it? Was he getting enough to eat? It was 6 months, 7 months before the season would start. But that was how consuming it was for him, and that's why he was probably as great as he was. Not a Hall of Fame player, but a really great local representation of the football team, which sadly didn't have much. I mean, he was someone that you could hang your hat on, and didn't become Lawrence Taylor as you thought, wow, look at that. Look at what he did in his first game. But on the other hand, the steadiness and the way he was a stand-up guy and the way he treated people throughout his career is really something to be celebrated. And it was really nice what they did for him. They don't do things well, especially these kind of things. But it sounds like they handled the Ryan Kerrigan retirement very, very well. Coming up, George Jetson, born on this day today. Huh? We'll talk about that as we continue. It's the Andy Pollin Hour, ESPN 630.
The Andy Pollin Hour on ESPN 630, the sports capital.
We're in for Tony today. We'll talk a lot more about the life of Bill Russell. Russell passing away yesterday at the age of 88, the greatest winner who ever lived, 2 NCAA championships, a gold medal, and 11 NBA titles in 13 years in the league. Also, the 2 developing stories. One, Deshaun Watson reportedly suspended 6 games, just 6 games. He'll only lose about $300,000 in salary. The NFL commissioner, Roger Goodell, has 3 days to appeal this decision. The NFL Players Association has already said they do not want an appeal on this. We'll see where it goes, but right now, Watson can participate in preseason, and he can actually even return to the team after the 4th game to start practicing for his return after 6 games. And the league had wanted a 1-year suspension. They didn't get that. They were negotiating, I think, 12 games as late as 2 days ago. And this is now, I guess settled, although I guess there could be an appeal by by the league on this. And if that happens, then there's a court case that gets tied up, and it's possible he's even playing while this is being decided in the court. So I would think that they kind of move on from this, and the next shoe to fall is what happens with Dan Snyder. Is there going to be some type of action taken by the league with this Mary Jo White investigation of these allegations by Tiffany Johnston that Dan Snyder put his hand on her knee at a team dinner and tried to push her towards his limousine? That's now being investigated, along with financial allegations that he was skimming money from the league and things like that. How's this all going to happen, and are they going to bury this? Is this going to be something that comes out late Friday afternoon and they try and get through the weekend where we actually have football starting with the Hall of Fame game? And the other story that we're waiting on is what's going to happen with Juan Soto. Trade deadline 6 o'clock tomorrow. And if you check the tweets of the national baseball people like Bob Nightingale of USA Today and Jeff Passan of ESPN, it sounds like they're moonwalking a little bit. And there does seem to be a stronger and stronger possibility that Juan Soto will be still a National after 6 o'clock tomorrow evening, that there won't be a deal, that they are telling teams, and according to Nightingale, the three teams left in it are the Padres, the Cardinals, and the Dodgers. But if they don't get their price, then they'll just wait till the offseason or maybe make another run at signing them long term. Who knows? That seems to have been a change of direction of the wind, because the wind seemed to be blowing in the direction of him definitely being traded. In fact, listening to Passan last week, he said, how can he not be traded? Because now's the time. You got him for 3 pennant races instead of if you trade him in the offseason just for 2. But sounds like at least the Nationals are putting out the word that they're not going to accept less, that they're only going to get their price. If they don't get their price, they're going to keep them. And if you're watching the game yesterday, you saw Mike Rizzo sitting with John Mozeliak, who's the general manager of the Cardinals, and he did it in plain sight, I think for a reason. I think he wants to say to the other teams, hey, look at us. We're talking. If you're interested, meet our price. We'll see. If you grew up in the 1960s and even into the 1970s, you're probably familiar with this.
Meet George Jetson. His boy Elroy. Daughter Judy. Jane, his wife.
And it went on and on. All that while George was riding around in his spaceship, dropping the kids off at school, dropping the wife off at the mall, and going to work at Spacely Sprockets, where he worked. Now, this show came on in 1962, September of 1962, and it was supposed to show what the world would look like in 100 years. So we're projecting now to 2062. And it was based on just, the thinking of what the world was going to be like. But in the course of the show, they revealed that George, the principal in the show, the father of this family, was born July 31st, 2022. Which would have been yesterday. So by the time they got to 2062, he would have been 40 years old, which is about the time a guy has teenage kids and all that. And so that's why it's in the news now. And if you remember the show, I mean it's really one of the things we have that is in pop culture that showed what the future was supposed to look like. And in the Smithsonian Magazine put out a story on this. They said it's the single most important piece of 20th century futurism. And they had, one of the things that they looked at in how this show holds up, again, it came out in 1962. So it's now, the debut of the show is 60 years old. So think about projections of the future in 1962 to what it's like today, and it's really not all that different. They have video chatting. You see when George calls from work and says he's going to be late and talks to his wife, to Jane, he's talking on what we would now call FaceTime. But, they say, look, Skype came in the early 2000s. We've had Zoom with, especially since the start of the pandemic. FaceTime started in 2010, so they were right on that. When the house needs to be cleaned, the house is cleaned by a robot named Rosie. Well, we have the Rambam vacuum cleaner, or the Ramba, I guess it's called. It's a vacuum cleaner that goes on its own. You see Elroy in school with a wrist device in the back of the room watching the Flintstones cartoons on his wrist. Well, Apple Watch says that they're going to have video on the watches very, very soon. You see a machine that comes out and automatically combs the hair and brushes George's teeth. Well, we have electric toothbrushes. Maybe that's not the same. They get around by jetpacks. If you remember the first Super Bowl, you saw at the halftime show, these guys got up in the air in jetpacks. Well, that didn't really come into existence, but we're having the beginnings of self-driving cars. That's coming. Do we have a flying car yet? Well, not quite, but still some people do commute. Like if they live on Long Island and they're very, very wealthy, they commute to work in Manhattan in a helicopter. If you watch Succession, that's kind of how they move around, so it's possible. The show implies that they've left Earth. This all takes place in space because of smog and pollution and extreme weather. Well, we're not there yet, but we may be headed in that direction. So, when you laugh about what the projections of the future are going to be, like, say, from now, if we look back 60 years and look at the Jetsons, yes, it was a cartoon, but a lot of what they looked at isn't really far-fetched compared to today. And when you think of the Jetsons, of course, you think of that theme song from the start of the show in 1962. Pretty amazing. And my daughter watched the show, and she's now in her 30s. So it did hold up, and it still stands up as entertainment. Whether it stands up as what the future is actually was or is going to be, you could argue that. But there's a lot of things in there that actually have happened. And I've talked about this before. Went to the 1964 World's Fair, and there was a display in the telephone display that you could actually see the other person while you were talking to them. It was just a still picture. There wasn't video. And I thought over the years, as time went on, well, why haven't they developed this? Because you get to see Grandma when you talk to her on the phone. Well, there really wasn't the demand for it, and eventually, FaceTime came along, but, smartphones didn't really become mainstream until maybe 10 years ago, 10, 11 years ago. Something. I think the first smartphone was invented by Apple. The first Apple phone was invented, I think, in 2007, so that's 16 years. And it did take a long time for it to happen. So a lot of fun stuff. There was a nice story about it in the New York Post yesterday. Coming up, we'll get to the Tony Kornheiser Show, more memories of the late, great Bill Russell. And also in the next hour, you'll hear Bram Weinstein and his conversation with Sam Howell, the rookie quarterback who they drafted out of North Carolina. We'll get to that and more with the Tony Kornheiser Show next, ESPN 630.